Welcome to the Cipher of the Seven Lamas, a Sherlock Holmes adventure from the series Sherlock Holmes, the Eastern Enigma, Tales from the Great Hiatus, playing in the year 1891. For years, the world believed my dear friend Sherlock Holmes had perished at the Reichenbach Falls. It was only much later that I discovered, hidden within his old travel trunk, a series of journals written in a complex cipher. With Mycroft's considerable aid, I have at last decoded these accounts from his great hiatus, tales of his journey through the enigmatic East, where the master of logic confronted mysteries of a most ancient and spiritual nature. I shall begin my recitation with an affair from his time in the sacred mountains of Tibet, an investigation he recorded as the Cipher of the Seven Lamas. Chapter 1. Among the many strange tales I have collected of my friend Sherlock Holmes's career, none is more singular than the one he recounted to me upon his return from the great hiatus, that period when the world believed him dead. He had passed 2 of those years deep in the Himalayas, living under the guise of a Norwegian explorer named Sigerson. It was from his cell in a remote Tibetan monastery, a place of profound silence, broken only by the snap of prayer flags in the ceaseless wind, that this most unusual adventure began. The air in his small stone chamber was thin and bitingly cold, carrying the faint, sweet scent of burning juniper. He was, by his own account, deep in meditation when a soft, hesitant rap came upon his wooden door. The sound was a stark intrusion into the rhythmic drone of distant chanting that was the monastery's very pulse. A moment later, the door creaked open, admitting a young monk whose saffron robes were a splash of fire in the grey twilight. Holmes rose from his simple mat, his tall, spare frame unfolding with a languid grace that belied the mind working ceaselessly within. He followed the acolyte through corridors hewn from the mountain itself. Their soft-soled footsteps made barely a whisper on the ancient stone, a counterpoint to the low moan of the wind funneling through the high passes. They ascended a final, steep flight of stairs, and stopped before a heavy, dark wood door, from beneath which crept the warm glow of a butter lamp. The young monk bowed and retreated, his departure as silent as his arrival. Holmes pushed the door open. The chamber within was austere, containing little more than woven cushions and a single low table. Seated there was an old man of indeterminate age, his face a magnificent map of wrinkles, his eyes holding a placid and unnerving depth. This was Khempo Rinpoche, the abbot, and the man Holmes considered one of the few true masters of deductive thought he had ever met. His voice, when it came, was a low and resonant hum, like the monastery's great ceremonial gong. "Sigerson, your meditations are disturbed. For that I am regretful, but the cause is grave," Khempo Rinpoche replied. "A peaceful mind is of little use when confronted with a genuine problem," Holmes replied, his English accent clipped and precise, cutting through his Norwegian disguise. "And you, I take it, have such a problem," stated Sherlock Holmes. The old Lama inclined his head, a gesture of profound weariness. He waited until the heavy door had thudded shut, sealing them in a cocoon of quiet intimacy. "A theft has occurred," he began, his calm tone belying the storm in his eyes. "The Kangyur Lakhang, our hidden library, has been violated. "The Star Pilgrim's Atlas has been taken," remarked Khempo Rinpoche. "A spiritual text?" Holmes asked, a flicker of academic interest crossing his features. Explained Sherlock Holmes. "It is bound as one, but its wisdom is not of the soul. It contains generations of astronomical calculations, star charts of unparalleled accuracy. It is the key to navigating these treacherous mountains, a map of the heavens that makes the impassable possible. In the wrong hands, it is a weapon," said Khempo Rinpoche. Holmes was instantly alert. The languor of the explorer sloughed away, revealing the keen-edged detective beneath. His eyes narrowed, sharp and calculating. "The wrong hands being, I presume, the Tsar? The great game finds its way even to the roof of the world," explained Sherlock Holmes. A deep sigh escaped the old man. "The Russian bear seeks a path through our peaks to the soft underbelly of British India. This atlas would give his agents that path. Its loss does not merely endanger our traditions, it threatens to bring the world's conflicts crashing down upon our sanctuary. The balance of empires could be undone by this single act of theft," remarked Khempo Rinpoche. The gravity of the situation settled in the small room, heavier than the mountain that entombed them. The fate of nations, it seemed, rested upon the recovery of a single stolen manuscript. Holmes leaned forward, the movement sharp, his expression hardening into one of intense concentration. The library must have been secured. What evidence did the thief leave? Footprints, a dropped button, a single misplaced fibre? Sherlock Holmes noted. A faint, sad smile touched Khempo Rinpoche's lips. He rose slowly, the dark wool of his robe rustling in the silence. The thief left no such crude traces. He left a message, a challenge to the mind. It is something I believe only you are equipped to interpret. "Come, I will show you," answered Khempo Rinpoche. Khempo Rinpoche led us not up to the open terraces, but down into the mountain's heart. The air grew colder, and the flickering butter lamps cast long, dancing shadows that seemed to stretch and writhe upon the rough-hewn stone walls. Our footsteps, a soft shuffle of leather and cloth, alone disturbed the profound silence. At last we stood before an immense wooden door, bound with age-darkened iron. With a low groan that echoed down the passage, the abbot pushed it open, revealing a darkness that drank the light from his lamp. His voice was a low murmur, yet it filled the space. "This is the Choskang, the house of sacred knowledge. Few have entered in 100 years. The thief, however, knew the way," remarked Khempo Rinpoche. Stepping inside, an extraordinary scent met me. A dry, fragrant perfume of ancient paper, cedar wood, and a faint, spicy aroma I could not place. The room was a perfect octagon, its walls lined floor to ceiling with scroll-filled cubbyholes. A single beam of moonlight pierced the gloom from a high aperture, illuminating a swirling galaxy of dust motes. In the chamber's center stood a simple stone altar where the theft had occurred. Holmes, or Sigerson as he was known here, immediately assumed his investigative posture. His languid posture vanished, replaced by a sharp, predatory stillness. His eyes, missing nothing, darted from the door's lock to the floor, then to the walls. The only sounds were the soft scrape of his boot on stone and the whisper-thin rustle of ancient scrolls in some unseen draught. He spoke abruptly, his sharp tone cutting the hallowed quiet. The lock is ingenious but unforced. The dust on the floor is thick and uniform, save for our tracks. No sign of a struggle, no dropped button or stray thread. The thief was either a ghost or one of your own. Sherlock Holmes responded. The abbot's gaze did not waver from the altar. The message was not left in the dust, my friend. It was left for all to see, answered Khempo Rinpoche. I followed his gesture. Upon the great stone slab where the sacred text must have rested sat 7 small identical bowls of unadorned clay. Each held a different measure of dried herbs, one a pale silvery leaf, another a dark gnarled root, a third a cluster of tiny purple flowers. A strange commingled scent, both medicinal and floral, now permeated the chamber. Holmes strode to the altar. He did not touch the bowls, but leaned close, his hawk-like nose twitching as he analyzed each one. His examination was swift, precise, and concluded with a sharp, frustrated breath. He straightened, turning to the abbot with profound impatience. This is what the thief left? A collection of simples and mountain weeds. It is not a clue, Rinpoche. It is primitive ritualism. Superstitious mummery intended to confuse, to throw us off the scent with meaningless symbols. Sherlock Holmes observed sharply. A faint, sad smile touched the old man's lips, and his voice was as gentle as falling snow. To one who cannot read, all writing appears as meaningless symbols. This is not confusion, Sigerson. It is a confession, a signature written in the language of these mountains, Khempo Rinpoche said. Holmes fell silent, his piercing grey eyes fixed on the 7 silent bowls. One could see the cogs of his magnificent mind turning, searching for a logical foothold in a problem that defied Western reason. The wind moaned outside, a desolate sound that deepened the library's oppressive sanctity. For a moment his confidence wavered, confronted by a puzzle whose very grammar was unknown to him. At last he spoke, his voice devoid of its earlier frustration, and now honed to a fine, cold point. A language. Very well, then it must be translated. Tell me, Abbot, who among your brethren is an expert in the flora of this region? Who would know the properties and meanings of these words? Replied Sherlock Holmes. The question hung in the cold, still air. The mystery of the stolen text remained, but its solution would not be found in the analysis of dust or door jambs, but in the minds and hearts of the men who called this lonely monastery home. Holmes's brief flicker of frustration vanished as swiftly as a candle flame in a gale. After a final, contemplative moment amidst the 7 silent bowls, he turned on his heel. His tall, gaunt frame cast a long shadow as he swept from the lamplit library. We followed him into the main courtyard, where the biting wind whipped robes and sent prayer flags chattering on their lines, and the air carried the low, resonant drone of chanting from the main hall, a sound that seemed to be the very heartbeat of the mountain. His voice was low and sharp, cutting through the ambient hum. The Rinpoche seeks a spiritual message in the herbs, Watson. I, however, seek a very human flaw. We shall find it not in the crime, but in the congregation, replied Sherlock Holmes. His eyes, like chips of grey flint, scanned the monks who passed, their saffron and crimson robes a stark splash of colour against the grey stone. They moved with a placid grace, their sandals whispering over the worn flagstones. Holmes's attention, however, bypassed the elder Lamas, settling instead upon the younger novices. "What are you looking for, Holmes?" I asked, my own breath plumbing in the cold. Dr. John Watson replied. "Dissatisfaction," he replied without turning his gaze. "Most here look inward or to their masters for guidance. Their focus is immediate. But observe that young man by the scriptorium archway. Tenzin Gyatso, I believe, is his name. See how his eyes are not on his prayer wheel, but on the distant pass. He looks outwards, Watson. A mind fixed upon the horizon is a mind susceptible to the temptations that lie beyond it." The monk in question was indeed distinct. While his fellows displayed a serene composure, a restless energy seemed to thrum beneath the young man's skin. With a purposeful stride, Holmes approached him, gesturing towards the arched doorway of the scriptorium. The monk gave a hesitant nod and led us inside, into a place of profound quiet, where the only sounds were the scratching of reed pens on parchment and the soft rustle of turning pages. The air smelled of ink and aged paper. "A scholar's work is never done," Holmes remarked, his voice softened to match the room's reverence, though an edge of inquiry remained. "You copy the ancient texts." The young monk, Tenzin, looked up, his eyes betraying a flash of surprise. He was handsome, with sharp features and an intelligent brow, but his expression was shadowed by something I could only interpret as a deep-seated impatience. "I preserve them, sir," he corrected, his voice tight with a respect that felt brittle. "As my masters have for generations," Tenzin Gyatso said. "And does it never trouble you," Holmes pressed, leaning slightly closer, "that so much knowledge remains here, locked away from a world that thirsts for it? Knowledge of the stars, of navigation. Such things could change the fortunes of empires," Sherlock Holmes observed sharply. Tenzin's knuckles whitened where he gripped his pen. A faint tremor ran through his hand, and he set the instrument down with a sharp click against the wooden desk that seemed unnaturally loud in the silence. His voice, when he spoke again, was a fierce whisper, laden with a bitterness that was startling. "We chart the heavens, but are forbidden to sail the seas. We possess wisdom that could guide nations, yet we use it only to mark the seasons for our barley harvest. What is the point of a key if the door is never to be opened?" replied Tenzin Gyatso. He fell silent, his chest rising and falling rapidly, as if he had said more than he intended. The motive Holmes had sought was laid bare. Not simple greed, but the terrible ache of ambition trapped by tradition. Holmes absorbed this, his face remaining unreadable, before a slow, deliberate nod. "A most compelling argument," he said smoothly. "You are not the only outsider here who values knowledge, I believe. There is an Englishwoman, a botanist, is there not?" explained Sherlock Holmes. Tenzin's gaze flickered. The mention of another foreigner seemed to catch him off guard, deflating his passionate outburst. He gave a curt, dismissive nod, and with a mumbled excuse turned back to his parchment, the interview clearly at an end. As we walked away, the sound of his pen scratching resumed, but now it seemed frantic, angry. Holmes did not speak until we were back in the courtyard, the wind once more whistling in our ears. "A clear motive, Watson, and a passionate heart. But a fire needs a spark. I think it is time we paid a visit to this Lady Evelyn Reed and her collection of mountain flora." After his disquieting interview with the young novice Tenzin, my friend's investigation took a most unexpected turn. From Holmes's later account, I can picture him approaching the structure that afternoon, a marvel of glass and iron clinging to the mountainside like a crystalline beetle. It was the monastery's greenhouse, a place of impossible warmth and life in that thin, cold air. The wind howled a mournful song around its corners, but within, as the heavy door creaked open, a wave of humid, earthy air greeted him, thick with the scent of damp soil and exotic blossoms. The low hum of insects trapped within this bubble of perpetual summer was the only sound. There, amidst a riot of green, a woman was bent over a bench, her attention utterly consumed by a delicate, purple-flowered specimen under a magnifying lens. She was tall and slender, dressed not in furs, but in practical tweed, and her auburn hair was pinned with a precision that suggested a mind of similar order. This, Holmes deduced, could only be the English botanist, Lady Evelyn Reed. "I am told you are the architect of this remarkable sanctuary, Lady Evelyn," Sherlock Holmes said. She did not startle, but straightened slowly, her gaze sharp and assessing as she turned to face him. Her voice, when it came, was as crisp and cool as the mountain air outside. "I am its custodian. The mountain is the architect, and you are Mr. Sigerson, the Norwegian explorer. I confess I had expected someone more weathered," responded Lady Evelyn Reed. "As I had expected a botanist to be content with cataloguing petals. Yet this is a laboratory, not merely a garden. You study more than form. You study function," Sherlock Holmes responded. A flicker of interest appeared in her cool grey eyes. She gestured with a slender hand towards the rows of plants. "Function is everything. These plants do not grow here for beauty. They grow to survive. They manufacture their own defenses, their own medicines. Knowledge that the monks hoard as spiritual wisdom is, in fact, simple chemistry. A truth that ought to belong to the world, don't you think?" remarked Lady Evelyn Reed. Her tone was light, yet Holmes detected a current of fierce conviction beneath it. He moved closer to a tray of drying herbs, their mingled scents filling the air. "Uninteresting philosophy. Tell me, this one here, I have seen it used in poultices by the locals. What is its scientific value?" observed Sherlock Holmes. He indicated a small, leathery-leafed plant. Lady Evelyn picked up a sprig, her expression purely academic, yet her answer would prove to be the key that turned the entire investigation upon a new axis. "Ah, Saxifraga afghanica. The monks value it for its symbolism, of course, but its practical properties are far more compelling. It produces a volatile oil that is a remarkable desiccant, highly effective at preventing mold and decay in organic materials. One could use it to preserve a delicate manuscript, for instance, through the most arduous of journeys." Lady Evelyn Reed said, She spoke the words with the detached air of a lecturer, but Holmes felt a thrill of discovery. It was a clue of the most profound nature, offered up unknowingly. He saw in her not the greed of a common thief, but the dangerous fire of an ideologue, one who would steal a treasure not for profit, but to liberate it. A most useful property indeed. "You have a formidable understanding of this place, madam," stated Sherlock Holmes. "I make it my business to understand things that are kept hidden, Mr. Sigerson. Knowledge should not be imprisoned by walls, whether they are made of stone or of superstition," said Lady Evelyn Reed. Her gaze was a direct challenge, and in that moment Holmes knew he was facing an adversary of the first order. He had found his second suspect, and she was, in her own way, more formidable than any criminal he had ever pursued. He left the warmth of the greenhouse and stepped back into the biting wind, the door sighing shut behind him. He had two motives, two suspects, but not a single shred of proof. The path forward was suddenly obscured, as if by a mountain fog. For 3 days a palpable gloom had settled upon my friend. Far from clarifying the affair, his encounter with Lady Evelyn Reed had only deepened his frustration. We now sat in Khempo Rinpoche's private chamber, a tranquil space that only amplified Holmes's inner turmoil. A low, ceaseless wind moaned through the monastery's high crevices, underscoring the oppressive silence. Holmes, as Sigerson, paced the stone floor, his boots scuffing a restless rhythm that affronted the chamber's peace. Before his serene mentor, the 7 clay bowls sat in a simple, unvarying line. Holmes stopped his pacing and swept his hand toward them, a gesture of pure exasperation. "It is a dead end. There is no purchase here, no single fissure into which I might drive a wedge of logic. I have examined the bowls for fingerprints, for traces of foreign clay, for any sign of their manufacture. They are identical to hundreds stored within this lamasery. The herbs are common to these slopes. There is nothing, no footprint, no broken lock, no misplaced thread. Only this primitive theatre," Sherlock Holmes said. Khempo Rinpoche, observing him with placid patience, did not move. His hands rested in his lap. The soft rustle of his saffron robe was the only sound as he shifted his weight. When he spoke, his voice was as calm and deep as a temple bell. "You are a great hunter of facts, Sigerson. You track the physical mark left by a man as a leopard tracks the scent of its prey. But you are searching for a footprint in a river. The thief did not leave you a clue to be found, but a message to be understood," remarked Khempo Rinpoche. "A message? With all due respect, Rinpoche, this is not a London drawing-room where correspondents trade in floral symbolism. This is a theft of vital intelligence. The culprit is a pragmatist, an agent of material gain, not a poet leaving verses in chamomile and mint," Sherlock Holmes observed sharply. Holmes's tone was sharp, his cadence clipped, the sound of a man whose science was challenged by what he deemed superstition. He picked up one of the bowls, peering at the dried leaves within, as if to force their secrets out by sheer will. The delicate click of the bowl on the stone shelf was unnaturally loud in the quiet room. "And is a map not a symbol? Are the numbers you use to calculate the trajectory of a star not symbols for a truth you cannot hold in your hand? You look at these plants and see only their substance. You have failed to see their essence. You see objects. You do not see a language," replied Khempo Rinpoche. Holmes fell silent. He stood perfectly still, his back to me, his gaze fixed on the 7 bowls. The wind outside seemed to rise in pitch, a lonely, searching sound. The Rinpoche's words hung in the air, not as a rebuke, but as an invitation, offering my friend not an answer, but a new lens through which to view the entire problem. The thief who took our scroll knows our ways. They know that for every plant that grows on this mountain, we have recorded not only its properties for medicine or for dye, but also its place in ceremony, its name in scripture, its purpose. The message is not in the clay, Sigerson. It is in the choice. "Why these 7 and no others?" remarked Khempo Rinpoche. I saw Holmes's shoulders, rigid with tension, relax by the smallest fraction. He did not turn, but I knew a profound shift was occurring within him. His frantic energy had subsided, replaced by the deep, unnerving stillness of pure concentration. The hunter had stopped chasing tracks and had, at last, begun to listen to the wind. In that moment, I knew he was no longer merely looking at the herbs. He was beginning to read them. Holmes later recounted to me the precise sequence of thoughts that led him from the brink of frustration to his remarkable discovery. He spoke with that peculiar mix of clinical detachment and intellectual pride. Alone in his Spartan cell, with the 7 clay bowls arranged before him on the rough-hewn table, he felt the investigation had reached a complete impasse. A low, keening wind moaned through a fissure in the stone wall, a constant, mournful sound that echoed the barrenness of his progress. The dry, brittle herbs in their earthenware prisons seemed to mock him with their silent, inscrutable meaning. For the better part of an hour he paced the stone floor, the soft scrape of his boots the only sound to challenge the wind. He admitted to me that his Western mind, accustomed to footprints, ash, and the telling minutiae of physical evidence, rebelled against this puzzle. It felt like charlatanism, a piece of mystical theatre designed to confound. But the earnest, intelligent face of Khempo Rinpoche kept returning to his mind's eye. The old Lama's words, spoken with such calm certainty, echoed more persistently than the wind. The clue is both physical and symbolic. You must learn to see with new eyes. He stopped his pacing abruptly, the silence in the cell suddenly profound. He drew a chair, its legs groaning in protest against the floor, and sat before the bowls. He forced himself to look past the objects themselves and consider the idea they represented. A message, not a random collection, but a deliberate sequence. A sequence, a formula, not of the spirit, but of the earth. What if the symbolism is merely a cloak for a practical, chemical purpose? Replied Sherlock Holmes. And then it came to him. It was not a sudden flash, but rather the quiet alignment of disparate facts, like tumblers falling into place within a complex lock. He recalled a scroll he had examined weeks before in the monastery's library, a seemingly esoteric text on the botanical reagents of the high peaks. It described how tinctures and resins from certain plants, when applied in a precise order, could produce specific reactions, binding, cleansing, and preparing surfaces for pigments. He had dismissed it then as arcane lore. His long, pale fingers hovered over the first bowl, then the second. In that moment, two worlds of knowledge merged. The Eastern wisdom of sequential botany fused with his own profound understanding of Western organic chemistry. The pieces, he realized, were no longer abstract symbols. They were ingredients. Of course, the rhododendron leaf, crushed, would yield a mild acidic solution to prepare the parchment. Then the primrose, a natural fixative. The juniper berry, a mordant to bind what is to come. Each step prepares the way for the next, a cascade of chemical reactions, replied Sherlock Holmes. He rose from his chair, his movements now filled with a vibrant, predatory energy. He saw the entire chain with absolute clarity. The 7 herbs were not a message in themselves. They were the precise and sophisticated recipe for creating a message. It is a formula for an invisible ink, a sympathetic stain designed to remain utterly unseen until a developing agent, most likely simple, direct heat, is applied. The astronomical data, the charts, the tables, they were never stolen at all. A new and chilling understanding settled upon him. The thief had not smuggled a priceless text from the most secure library in the Himalayas. No, the crime was infinitely more subtle, more patient, and more audacious. The text had been copied, and now he knew he must find those seemingly blank pages, the pages upon which the fate of empires was written in unseen ink. The moment of revelation had passed, leaving in its wake not calm, but a fierce, predatory energy in my friend. Holmes sprang from his meditation cushion, his lanky frame uncoiling with a sudden purpose, his coarse woolen robes rustling against the floor mat. The 7 herbs, once a mystical puzzle, were now nothing more than a set of chemical instructions in his mind. The air, thick moments before with contemplation, now crackled with the thrill of the hunt. It was never about theft, Watson. That was our primary error. Why steal the book when one can steal its very soul? The manuscript was not taken. It was copied, Sherlock Holmes noted. The logic of it struck me with the force of a physical blow. The herbs were the formula for an ink designed to be unseen. The culprit, therefore, had not fled with a bulky text, but with its knowledge transcribed onto seemingly innocent pages. Our search had been for the wrong thing entirely. Our quest now shifted. We required not a stolen book, but the tools of a meticulous forger. We must examine the quarters of our 2 suspects immediately. We search for papers, for pens, for the slightest trace of chemical residue. Our footsteps echoed softly on the cold stone floors as we made our way first to the cell of Tenzin Gyatso. The room was a study in austerity. A sleeping mat, a single wooden bowl, and a prayer wheel whose faint, rhythmic creak was the only sound. There was nothing. No hidden papers, no ink stains upon the floorboards. The cell was as barren of clues as the mountain peaks outside were of trees. We proceeded next to the quarters assigned to Lady Evelyn Reed, and the contrast could not have been more pronounced. Here a corner of England was carved out of the Himalayas. Books on botany were stacked high, a brass microscope gleamed on a small table, and the air carried the faint, peppery scent of drying plant specimens. Ah, a travel log. A detailed account of her journey, no doubt. Yet look here, Watson. An explorer ceases her observations so abruptly. Most unlikely. Sherlock Holmes said. He flipped towards the back of the leather-bound journal, revealing a dozen pages, utterly and unnervingly blank. He laid the book open on the table. For a moment he stood in silent contemplation, his gaze sweeping the room. Then, with a sudden inspiration, he moved to a small brazier, where a few embers still sighed amongst the grey remnants of a fire. He scooped a fine layer of powdery white ash into a porcelain tea-bowl. Next, he retrieved a tin of potent black tea leaves, brewing a small quantity in another bowl with steaming water to create a liquid as dark as midnight. The principles of chemistry, my dear fellow, are universal. Tannic acid from the tea, when combined with a mild alkali from this wood ash, will form a reagent. If our copyist used an ink with even a trace of ferrous salts, a common component, this simple concoction will force it to reveal itself. Dipping a small brush from her watercolor set into his impromptu developer, Holmes began to paint it across the blank page. The steady, deliberate strokes made a soft rasping sound on the paper. As I leaned closer, my breath held in my chest. At first there was nothing. Then, like a ghost materializing from the ether, faint brown lines began to bleed into existence. They were not words, but something far more complex. Intricate star charts, angular diagrams, and columns of precise mathematical formulae. It was the sacred data, the celestial map of the mountains, rendered visible before my very eyes. The mind that transcribed this is as brilliant as it is ruthless. Lady Evelyn has her prize, but the hand that arranged the herbs, the one who left the clue, that, I suspect, belongs to a more credulous soul. Come, Watson, we must now have a word with the young monk, Tenzin. With the evidence from Lady Evelyn's travelogue, Holmes wasted no time. He moved with a silent, predatory grace through the monastery's corridors. We found Tenzin Gyatso on a secluded stone balcony overlooking the valley far below. The wind, thin and sharp, whipped at his saffron robes, carrying a lonely, whistling sound that echoed the vast emptiness of the sky. The rhododendron leaf was placed to the northeast, was it not? And the wild ginger precisely to the southwest. An arrangement of perfect, almost geometric balance, stated Sherlock Holmes. Tenzin started violently, spinning around. The colour drained from his face, leaving it a sickly pallor against the darkening sky. His hands, resting on the cold stone balustrade, clenched into white-knuckled fists. He opened his mouth, but only a choked gasp escaped. Such precision is not the work of a common thief who grabs and flees, nor is it the symbolic gesture of a devout traditionalist. It is the careful, methodical work of one following a set of instructions they do not comprehend, the work of a pawn. Sherlock Holmes responded. The word hung in the biting air. Tenzin's composure shattered. A great shuddering sob escaped him, and he sagged against the stone, his face a mask of misery and fear. His voice trembled as the confession poured forth. I did not know. She told me it was a ritual of purification. Lady Evelyn, she said our ways were stagnant, that this mandala would open the monastery to new energies. She gave me a chart, a drawing of immense complexity. Each herb, each position, all were precisely marked. She called it the Mandala of 7 Truths, and swore it was an ancient rite she had rediscovered for our benefit. Tenzin Gyatso answered. He spoke in a rush, the words tumbling over one another in his desperation to be understood, to be absolved. He described a woman who had played upon his ambition, upon his secret belief that the monastery's isolation was a weakness. She had presented herself not as a thief, but as a liberator of forgotten wisdom. I only wanted to help us progress, to connect with the world. I let her into the library that night. I placed the bowls just as the diagram instructed, while she consulted the sacred text. I never suspected. I am a fool, a blind and arrogant fool. Your folly is of no consequence now. What matters is her intent. When does she plan to leave? Sherlock Holmes said. The young monk looked up, his eyes wide with a new terror, that of his betrayal's final consequence. The trade caravan. It departs from the lower pass at dawn. She intends to be on it, Tenzin Gyatso said. Holmes gave a single sharp nod. He turned his back on the broken young man, his silhouette stark against the vast, unforgiving landscape. The wind howled, a prelude to the coming chase. Then we must be at that pass before she is. The mountain will be our final board, and this game has but one move left, observed Sherlock Holmes. The wind was a living thing upon the Zojila Pass, a malevolent spirit that whipped our cloaks about us with sharp cracks like gunfire, and stung our faces with ice. It was a sound that filled the world, a ceaseless, high-pitched moan that whistled through the granite crags. Beneath my feet, the packed snow and ice gave a sharp, brittle crunch with every step, a sound that was immediately snatched away by the gale. The air was so thin it was a labor to draw breath, and the vast, echoing emptiness of the landscape seemed to press in upon the soul. I confess I could not fathom what purpose this vigil served. Holmes, are you certain of this? To wait here in this God-forsaken place? She could be 100 miles away by now, Dr. John Watson replied. Holmes, who stood a few yards ahead of me behind a great outcropping of granite, did not turn. His tall, lean figure was a stark silhouette against the grey, churning sky. He had pulled his collar high, but his voice, when it came, cut through the gale's howl as clear and sharp as a shard of ice. She is not, Watson. Consider the logic. The young monk Tenzin was her unwitting accomplice inside the monastery, but he is of no use to her out here. A lone European woman travelling these mountains would invite scrutiny at every village and checkpoint. She is far too intelligent for such a blunder. No, she requires camouflage, deduced Sherlock Holmes. He gestured with a gloved hand towards the narrow track that snaked its way down into the valley below. The path was empty, a desolate ribbon of grey against the white. There is but one form of cover that offers anonymity and a legitimate reason for passage: the trade caravan to Leh. It departed from the village at dawn, a fact I took the liberty of confirming yesterday. It is slow, predictable, and its departure is the only logical course of action for a fugitive wishing to blend in. She will be with them, deduced Sherlock Holmes. His certainty was, as ever, absolute, and so we waited. An hour passed, then another, the cold seeping deeper into my bones. Then I heard it, a new collection of sounds carried on the wind. First, the faint metallic clink-clank of bells. Then the low guttural calls of men urging their animals on. Beneath it all was the heavy, rhythmic thud of hooves on the frozen track. The sounds grew steadily louder, echoing strangely in the thin air, until the head of the caravan appeared around a bend below us. A long, slow-moving procession of yaks, laden with goods, their bells clinking a dissonant, chaotic tune. We watched as the train of merchants and animals labored up the incline. The plodding of hooves and the jangling of bells grew louder, filling the pass. And there, walking beside a heavily laden yak, was a figure in heavy travelling furs, the hood drawn low. It could have been anyone. Yet Holmes shifted his weight, the faint scrape of his boot on stone the only sound he made. It was a minute signal that his quarry was in sight. As the figure drew level with our hiding place, Holmes stepped out from behind the rock, his movement swift and silent. He stood directly in the traveller's path. "Lady Evelyn Reed, I presume? Your botanical expedition appears to have taken you rather far afield." The figure stopped dead. The plodding gait ceased, and the yak's bell gave one final hollow clank before falling silent. The fur-lined hood was pushed back, revealing the pale, intelligent face of Lady Evelyn. There was no fear in her eyes, no shock or surprise, only a cold, appraising look. Her voice, when she spoke, was as crisp and cutting as the alpine air, utterly devoid of tremor. "Mr. Sigerson, or should I call you Holmes? I confess I am impressed. The clue of the herbs was intended for a mind of some calibre. It appears I did not misjudge," answered Lady Evelyn Reed. The wind was a blade against the cheek, a constant, keening sound scouring the very rock of the high pass. It was here, with the world falling away into mist on either side, that Holmes cornered her. He recounted the tale to me later, his lean frame silhouetted against the brazier in our small room, his voice calm and precise as he detailed the final act of his investigation. "She showed no surprise when I stepped from behind the outcropping of granite. Her porters had fallen back. We were quite alone, two specks of English stubbornness in an immense and alien landscape. I simply stood in her path. Deduced, Sherlock Holmes." He paused, steepling his fingers. "I pictured the scene as if I had been there. The formidable Lady Evelyn Reed, her face hardened by weather and conviction, regarding my friend not of fear, but of intellectual curiosity. "The manuscript, Lady Evelyn. I will trouble you for it now," declared Sherlock Holmes. He told me she gave a short, sharp laugh, a sound instantly snatched away by the wind. "So, the Norwegian explorer deciphers a message of herbs. I confess I am impressed. I left them as a signature, a challenge, a test to see if there was another mind in this wilderness capable of appreciating a complex problem. I surmised there was not," responded Lady Evelyn Reed. "Your vanity, madam, is a most reliable informant. You considered it a game, while these people considered it a sacrilege," Sherlock Holmes observed sharply. Her voice, ringing with a zealot's fire, cut through the howl of the wind. They hoard knowledge. They keep secrets of navigation and astronomy locked away in the name of superstition. I intend to liberate it. All knowledge belongs to the world, Mr. Sigerson, said Lady Evelyn Reed. She declared. Not to a few reclusive monks, responded Lady Evelyn Reed. Holmes recounted to me how she used the name Sigerson with a deliberate, almost mocking emphasis. It was the name of the persona he had so carefully constructed, now thrown back at him as the mask was stripped away. A noble sentiment, were it not for your chosen partners in this liberation. The Russians do not pay for philosophy, they pay for military advantage, stated Sherlock Holmes. For the first time her composure seemed to crack. A flicker of raw ambition showed beneath the intellectual veneer. And what of it? Their gold will fund expeditions, publish findings, and break open a dozen more secret places like this. They are a vulgar tool for a magnificent purpose. One must be practical, answered Lady Evelyn Reed. You mistake greed for practicality, and you dress it in the robes of ideology. Your grand purpose is to see your own name etched into the annals of discovery at any cost. You are not a liberator. You are a thief who has composed a lecture to justify the picking of a lock. Now, the manuscript, Sherlock Holmes noted. He said there was a long silence, broken only by the wind and the distant clatter of a loose stone falling down the scree slope. The force of his logic had stripped away her rhetoric, leaving only the stark truth. Her shoulders slumped, not in defeat, but in a kind of weary resignation. From within her heavy travelling coat she produced a long cylinder wrapped in oilskin. She held it out to him, her gaze defiant. Holmes took it. The weight in his hand was the weight of a concluded case, the physical proof of a chain of reasoning that had stretched from a quiet library to this desolate peak. The crime was solved, the prize recovered. But as he stood there on that narrow track, with the ideologue before him and the monastery behind, the question of justice had yet to be answered. The recovered manuscript, a roll of aged parchment bound in silk, felt a weighty and conclusive thing in Holmes's hands. We stood before the monastery's great main gate, its iron-studded timbers a stark barrier against the world beyond. A wind, sharp as a surgeon's knife, whistled down from the high passes, whipping at the robes of the assembled monks and tugging at the hem of Lady Evelyn Reed's heavy travelling coat. She stood apart, her chin held high, a portrait of unrepentant defiance. Beside her, the young monk Tenzin was a study in contrast. His head bowed so low, his brow nearly touched his clasped hands. Khempo Rinpoche stepped forward, his movements measured and serene amidst the palpable tension. The wind did not seem to touch him. He faced the Englishwoman, and when he spoke, his voice was not loud, yet it carried over the mournful cry of the wind with an unnerving clarity. You came seeking knowledge, Lady Evelyn Reed. You found it, but you sought to turn it into a weapon, a key for a lock of your own making. You mistook our guardianship for imprisonment. That is an error of the spirit, not the mind, Khempo Rinpoche replied. Your traditions are a cage, however gilded, replied Lady Evelyn Reed. She replied, her voice crisp and utterly devoid of remorse. Knowledge belongs to the light, to all who can grasp it. History will prove me right, replied Lady Evelyn Reed. History, madam, is a dispassionate judge of motive, declared Sherlock Holmes. Holmes interjected, his tone cutting and precise. It will note that your pursuit of enlightenment concluded with a transaction intended for the Tsar's treasury, a rather grubby final chapter for so lofty a tome. A flicker of anger crossed her features, the first genuine crack in her composure. Rinpoche raised a hand, silencing any further exchange. 2 monks moved to unbar the gate. The groan of ancient wood and the shriek of rusted iron resounded from the stone walls around us. We do not deal in prisons here. The mountains themselves will be your walls. You are to be escorted to the trade road. You will not return. Go and reflect upon the nature of cages, Khempo Rinpoche said. Without another word, Lady Evelyn turned and strode through the opening. She did not look back as the heavy gates swung shut behind her. The final booming thud of the bar falling into place was like a gavel of fate. The silence that followed was profound, broken only by the ceaseless wind. The old monk then turned his gaze upon Tenzin, who flinched as if struck. The Rinpoche's expression softened, the stern judge replaced by the patient teacher. You were tempted by a world you do not know. You saw power in its promises and mistook it for strength. Your betrayal was not of greed, but of impatience, remarked Khempo Rinpoche. Tenzin finally looked up, his face a stark mask of misery. I have brought shame. I will accept any punishment, replied Tenzin Gyatso. He whispered, his voice little more than a trembling, hoarse breath. Your punishment will be to learn. You will spend 2 years in the scriptorium at Sakya, studying the very texts you sought to discard. You will copy the histories of those who sought shortcuts to enlightenment. You will learn that true progress is a path, not a destination reached by stealth. Go with Brother Norbu. Begin your journey, answered Khempo Rinpoche. The young man bowed deeply, a silent acceptance of a fate far kinder than he could have expected. Another monk placed a gentle hand on his shoulder and led him away, their soft footsteps receding into the monastery's courtyard. Holmes and I were left alone with the Rinpoche as the wind howled a lonely lament around the gatehouse. A judgment of extraordinary wisdom, Rinpoche. By our English laws, one would have faced the gallows, the other a prison cell. Both would have departed embittered. Sherlock Holmes noted, "Justice is not a closing of accounts, Sigerson. It is the restoration of balance. Her path is now hers to choose, and his is guided back to our own," responded Khempo Rinpoche. The old man looked from the gate to the manuscript still in my friend's hands, then to Holmes himself. A thoughtful expression settled upon his ancient, weathered features. You found the truth by following a chain of physical evidence, and yet the first link of that chain was a symbol you could not read. Come, let us speak of these different paths to the same summit. The judgments had been passed, and a profound quiet had once more settled over the monastery, a silence deeper than any I had known before. In Khempo Rinpoche's chamber, the air was thick with the scent of sandalwood incense and melting yak butter from a single flickering lamp. Its small flame cast long, dancing shadows upon the painted walls, making the serene faces of the bodhisattvas appear to breathe in the gloom. A low moan of wind, a lonely sound from the high passes, was the only intrusion from the world outside. Holmes sat not in his usual alert posture, but in a more contemplative state, his long fingers steepled. He stared into the flame as if the solution to some final unspoken problem lay within its golden heart. Khempo Rinpoche, seated opposite, broke the stillness, his voice a low and resonant hum that seemed part of the very fabric of the room. The vessel is whole again, Sigerson. The knowledge is secure. But the crack, once made, remains a part of its history. Do you see it as a flaw or as a lesson? Said Khempo Rinpoche. Holmes shifted his gaze from the flame to the abbot's ancient, knowing eyes. There was a pause, a moment of consideration uncharacteristically long for my friend. As a lesson, Rinpoche, I have travelled many thousands of miles to learn it, though I did not know that when I began my journey, declared Sherlock Holmes. He spoke with a quiet gravity I had seldom heard, a tone stripped of his usual sharp impatience. Your methods are a marvel. You see the world in its smallest parts, a grain of soil, a trace of ash, a single misplaced hair. You followed these tiny threads, and they led you to the truth. Yet the first clue held the entire story, did it not? Khempo Rinpoche answered. It did, and I was blind to it, Sherlock Holmes noted. This admission, so plain and unadorned, was more startling to me than any of his most brilliant deductions. He leaned forward slightly, the lamplight carving his hawk-like features from the shadows. I saw 7 herbs in 7 bowls. My mind immediately sought a physical pattern, a chemical code. I catalogued them by genus and species, by toxicological properties, and by geographical distribution. I treated them as mere data, as inert facts to be arranged and rearranged until a logical sequence emerged. I saw the letters of the message, but I could not read the language, observed Sherlock Holmes. His voice was a low, confessional murmur, the voice of a man recounting a fundamental error in his own philosophy. You, however, saw their spirit. You knew that juniper is for purification, rhododendron for vigilance, and gentian for bitter truths. You understood this was not a cipher to be solved, but a story to be understood. It was a warning from a troubled soul, from Tenzin, using the language of the mountains. He was confessing his turmoil to anyone who could read the poetry of this place. I was deaf to it. The stars can be mapped with the cold precision of mathematics. That is your great gift. But to navigate by them, one must also feel the turning of the world beneath one's feet. One must understand the meaning, not just the measurement. You have now learned to do both, answered Khempo Rinpoche. A faint smile touched the old man's lips, a gesture of profound respect. Holmes inclined his head in a gesture of acknowledgment that was both solemn and sincere. The wind outside gave another lonely cry, as if marking the end of our extraordinary sojourn in this place perched at the roof of the world. You have given me a new lens through which to view the world, Rinpoche, a most valuable instrument. Sherlock Holmes observed sharply. In that quiet chamber, with the scent of incense hanging in the air, I felt I was witness to more than the conclusion of a case. I had seen the meeting of two great minds from two different worlds, and in their mutual understanding I saw a synthesis of wisdom that was more remarkable than any stolen manuscript. My friend had not merely solved a crime, he had, I believe, found a missing piece of himself.